Hi everyone, welcome to episode 118 of The Green Life. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with an amazing doctor. She's a naturopathic practitioner who specializes in functional medicine, and her name is Dr. Jenny Tufenkian. Dr. Jenny focuses on fatigue and how to really help people feel more energized. This is such a good conversation, especially when it comes to women's health, so please stay tuned. Now, before we get into it, I want to give a big shout out to Namawell for the J2 juicer. You have the discount code in the notes that is just for you, so that if you want to upgrade your juicer, and I really suggest it, you can get 10% off. I'm also an affiliate of Dr. Morse's Herbs, Wonder Workshop, New Zest, and those are products I personally use myself because they are clean, they are exactly what they say on the tin, and I absolutely love the story of the founders. So if you want to check them out, everything is in the show notes for you, including discount codes. Alright, without further ado, let's dive into this conversation about fatigue and women with the amazing Dr. Jenny. Hello, Dr. Jenny. Thank you so much for joining me on The Green Life today. Such an honor to have you here. How are you?
Thank you, Chantal. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm doing well today, outside of the cold that you might hear in my voice, but it's just my body kind of getting some things out that probably need to come out right now.
I hear you. I'm going through the same. So it's just a reality. And actually, people are always like, oh, I'm so sorry you're sick. And I'm like, I'm so happy I got a cold because I didn't have it for like 3 years. And I'm like, my immune system needed a little bit of a shake up. So we're good for the next few years.
I know. I was just having a conversation with another physician about that, and she works mostly with cancer patients, and she and I have always had that same thing. When a patient comes in and says, I never get sick, we're like, uh-oh, that's not good. like once or twice a year, it's actually good to have a little reaction, a little stimulation. That's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so before we get into the subject, which is really, really interesting and much needed to be spoken about, I would love for you to give a little introduction about your work and how you became basically a functional medical practitioner, and you focus so much on fatigue, which is such a massive, important subject. Fatigue is like the hallmark of actually everything that is going on into our body. So. I would love for you to just give us a little story, your backstory.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the short version because, I've been on the planet long enough, but the long version's pretty long. And just to say that I really have to say I really have been focusing on guiding those people that struggle with complex chronic fatigue and long COVID and those complex cases. And the reason why is that this condition chose me. I believe that now, looking back through my history, I probably had chronic fatigue as a kid, myalgic encephalitis as a kid, as a teenager. I remember going into Kaiser in high school when I was really tired, and they tested me and said, you don't have mono, you don't have strep throat. Clearly, you're just trying to skip school, get back to school, kid. And I was like, I'm exhausted. I am exhausted. I was on the swim team and I couldn't really do my thing, and I was fried. And I'm sure that's what was going on with me. So but when this really hit was second year of medical school. I had decided to become a doctor when I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. I was unexpectedly pregnant. I was single, didn't have very much money, and I had this epiphany once I committed to having him that I'd always wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't think I was smart enough because I got a C on a high school biology test that I didn't even study for. And once I learned how to study, I got an A, but that programming of I'm not smart was still in there, and I didn't think I could do it. But I'd really always loved medicine. I'd loved herbalism. I'd loved nutrition. I loved all these pieces, and it just made sense to become a naturopathic doctor. That was perfect for me. And so I did that, and I went to school with my little kid. And by second year, I was happily married, and we decided it was time to have another child. And I had a series of miscarriages, and one of them was at 17 weeks where I hemorrhaged, passed out, was rushed to the hospital, and would have died without that hospital intervention, and would have just been a statistic of all the women that died of childbirth, right, throughout the eons. And that threw me into a dark night of the soul. Between that, all the losses, I'd lost 5 people close to me that year as well. I was in medical school with a child. I wasn't taking time. I had my friends at school we're going to go meditate. Do you want to come? And I'm like, what's meditation? I don't have time. I've got a kid. I'm in school. I'm studying and I'm being a mom. That's all I'm doing. So that time was intense. I was in bed. I was flat in bed for months. They had IVs in my arm. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was filled with anxiety, panic. I had suicidal ideation. Just like felt like death was right there, death of others, death of myself. People thought I was going to die. I mean, it was intense. And I had to be walked to the bathroom. Um, I was blessed with healers coming literally to my bedside because I couldn't get out of bed. And I ended up having a hypnotherapist that came and worked with me twice a week. And within a very short period of time, we broke through some of these deep subconscious things that were holding me back. And I was able to move from the bed to the couch. The anxiety, the depression was really blown out of there, and yet I was stuck with this fatigue that was unrelenting. I took a year out of medical school, and I was throwing everything I knew at it, and little pieces were beginning to come together where I was figuring out what I needed to work on, and but I didn't really know what I was doing. As I went back to school, and I was halfway through my residency, and then the last final piece of the puzzle came into place where I got all 20 of my mercury amalgams out, and then I had all this energy. And then I went from like being tired, feeling like I was already 90 years old in my body, to having exuberant energy. And I was able to all of a sudden live this incredible busy life. And I knew that you could heal this chronic fatigue. I knew that people could heal because I did. I healed 150%. I was working 17-hour days and didn't have, my breaks were my changes of pace. And that time in bed also really allowed me to be a much better physician because those people who are really sick, I knew what that was like. I really did. And it was a gift, and I grew spiritually in that time as well, in terms of just expanding what it meant to be in a human body. My center, my cosmos expanded during that time, and that was a gift. I didn't think I'd ever get chronic fatigue again. I knew you could heal from it. And then, this may be really interesting for those of you listening who may be women of a certain age. I was doing great, and I was super fit, working out, meditating, eating fantastic, all the stuff. And then I was playing soccer with my kid, injured my knee, and all of a sudden couldn't do the workout I was doing, wanted to stay fit, kept working out, did upper body and core stuff, got frozen shoulder. I'm in severe pain. Now I can't sleep. I'm in severe pain. And I say there was perimenopause sprinkled on top. And your estrogen is an anti-inflammatory, your progesterone is an anti-inflammatory. These things were all up and down now. I'm in the roller coaster, perimenopause. And all of a sudden, I am tanking so fast down the hill, back down to this gaping hole called chronic fatigue myalgic encephalitis. And I was like, oh no. That was when I learned another very important principle about this condition. Relapse is always possible. And I tell people this the first time we meet, because it's important to understand that, not from a fear base at all, from a place of empowerment, to understand that once you figure out what your root causes are, once you figure out what works for your body in terms of a treatment, in terms of an approach, then that's in your toolkit, and you can pull that out when you have a stress that might trigger a repeat event for you. So I ended up relapsing into another cycle of chronic fatigue myalgic encephalitis at that time, except this time the things that I did before wasn't what I needed. I needed something else, and I wasn't sure what that was. So my only option was to dive into the literature, and I just studied and studied at 3 o'clock in the morning and figured out that there are these 5 root causes to chronic fatigue myalgic encephalitis. And I ended up just getting got my clinic filled with all these people with this condition. And I was able to understand the different patterns of fatigue and what they sound like. And I was able to then, after in my journey, come out of that again as well at 150%, understanding a much more comprehensive view of what it was that makes people so exhausted all the time.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the pandemic hit, and here I am going, people, I need to let you know here, like May of 2020, I did a talk. We're going to have a second pandemic, folks. There's this thing called myalgic encephalitis, chronic fatigue, and it's caused, one of the root causes is mental emotional stress. Another root cause are viral infections. It's happening all around the globe. And sure enough, we have this long COVID piece. I just read a statistic. There were, what was it? They think there's probably probably 25 million people died from the COVID virus. There are now at least 400 million people with long COVID out there.
Wow.
I mean, talk about like impact. Like it's huge in terms of the impact of people. And so I ended up getting reactivated when I got long COVID as well. I had a perfect setup for it in terms of some of the stuff we can go into if we want to, that made it that I was at risk, and which was sort of from an academic perspective, from a clinician gets to learn from her own body experience. It's been really educational because I can see where what I knew before really does apply, and I can also see where there's some unique differences with this particular virus and how it impacts the body, and what we need to do a little bit, just need to be aware of, just like if Lyme disease was one of the things that triggered your chronic fatigue. So I am, now I would say about 95% better. I'm really close to being at the end of that. I really feel like it's my mission to empower people, for those of you who are struggling with exhaustion, to understand what your fatigue might be coming from, and that you really do have the power and the tools within you to figure out what it is, and to know that there are ways out of this. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned something as you were talking at the beginning, saying you went through your dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of women can actually really, even though they might not name it the dark night of the soul, they might not know this, or they haven't come across it, or they haven't used the term, but it's something that a lot of women in their 40s and 50s, but mostly 40s, start actually facing. And you went through it when you were pregnant, and you decided to go back to school, and you had to do everything you had to do. And oftentimes the dark night of the soul, especially, I'm going to come from my experience, so more of just a personal story. It feels like when you realize that you need support because you're at a very low time in your life, there is a lot going on, and you realize that the people in your life are actually not giving you that support, and something just triggers that moment where you feel like, oh my God. So I have defined the dark night of the soul before, but I would like to hear from you what that means to you. Like, how do you, if somebody's like, but what does it mean? How do I know I'm facing my dark night of the soul? What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think that, I don't know that there's a definition for it. So I think it's great to ask, what mine is. I'd say for me, so the way that I explain it is, I see that we have a physical body, a mental, emotional, and an energetic body, that we have all three of these bodies. And that used to sound really woo-woo when I said that, but we actually have science now to see that we have this energy body. We're more energy than we are matter. And these different bodies, often when we go through some sort of a crisis, somebody dies, we lose a parent, and we go through that crisis. Usually, our emotional body is really out of whack, usually when that happens. And maybe some of our energy body might be somewhat upset, but usually the physical body is still healthy. So you can move your body. Grief is like processing grief. It's so great to use your large, body parts to, to clean out the basement, to paint the garage, like to just do something is really great with your body when you're grieving. And that can kind of help the emotional body begin to process. My experience of myself when I was through the dark night of the soul, I'd say it's a couple different things. One is I felt like the physical, the mental, emotional, and the spiritual were both down. And I think this only happens a few times in our lives, usually, where all systems are down. And you really are at such a place of surrender. Like, I had no choice to surrender. I was always the rock. Like, I was always everybody's rock. I was the one that always had the extra snack, the extra money, the ability to talk to you if you're having a hard time. Like, growing up, I was always that person. And for me to have absolutely no ability to function without support was a huge, that was like full on intense for how I identified as a being, right? And it was terrifying for me to be that vulnerable. And yet that vulnerability and that surrender was exactly what I needed to do to be able to grow into this next place of being where I could trust something bigger than me, right? Which is why I say it's a spiritual thing. It wasn't a religious experience. It was a spiritual experience in terms of I felt like I'm more than just this physical body. There is this other thing when I connected to that I could just be. And I had to learn to let the world turn without me, which is somebody who grew up in trauma like most of us did. It's like that fear of losing control is there, right? I mean, it's like we all do that as little kids, whatever that means for us. And so it felt like for me, that's one piece of it was all systems down. Like, no joke, full surrender. Like I don't really, I literally didn't have a choice of what I was doing. I had to lie in the bed, and that was one piece of it. I'd say for me, the other part of Dark Night of the Soul is we call it Dark Night of the Soul for a reason because it is filled with darkness. It's scary. It's hard. You don't know when you're going to get it. I remember minutes felt like hours to me. It's like hours felt like days and days felt like weeks and months. I mean, time was just stretched out because it was just it was like I was in a dark tunnel and I didn't know how long it was going to be. I couldn't see out of it. And um, that's the other part of the Dark Night of the Soul piece. It's really dark. It's a hard place. It's a hard place to go, and it's a hard place to be. And I'd say the other piece of it for me, why I call it Dark Night of the Soul, is because that once you go through the journey and you allow yourself to be in the darkness and to be in this place of surrender and vulnerability, and I don't know, and I guess I don't, like what else could there be? I have no choice but to reach for something more than this. If I'm going to stay here in this body, I need to do something else. Then that's the soul part, right? That's the part where then you're opening yourself up. You're breaking down so that you can expand into being something else. And that's where the soul part comes in with this deeper knowing, with this understanding that makes sense for you, for whatever your life, your journey, your culture, your beliefs are. It's a bigger time for you. And then that's with you now for the rest of your life. And that's your soul journey. So that's to me how I see it and why I see it as a gift, even though it was living hell while I was in it. And it was very hard for people who were around me to see me go through it. It was, I couldn't parent. I mean, I couldn't do all the things I usually do so well, and I couldn't. So, and yet it was an absolute gift. So,
Wow. Yeah. I love that description. It's very accurate and it is personal. And I think that's definitely one of the hallmarks of Dark Night of the Soul. It's not like a cold. A cold is a cold. We know how to define it. It's like such a personal journey.
yeah,
I always said it's that part of you that you could decide to not face, but it's going to be in the background, and you're going to be living this lie where you know that you're not fulfilled, and that you
I love
haven't
it.
really, rised above
Yeah,
what you need to, because
yeah,
there is something you need to heal and fix. And like you mentioned, especially for those of us who come from trauma, and a
yeah,
lot of us have it, but like even whether it's a big T or small T, but
yeah,
it's actually, that growing up, for example, for me, it was like growing up as a parentified child,
yeah,
having control was absolutely necessary.
right.
And that still kind of sometimes shows up in my adult life. And
Yeah,
the Dark Night of the Soul taught me how to not do that, and that I can't control everything.
yeah,
That it's
exactly.
okay to, as you said, surrender
Yeah,
and actually heal properly and
yeah.
letting go. And sometimes for me, it came with the end of a lot of relationships. And
Uh-huh.
I feel that a lot of women find themselves in that place where we are told it's selfish for us to put ourselves first,
Yeah,
or that, oh, if that's family, your family comes before everything,
yeah,
your blood
yeah,
family, and whether
yeah,
they make you happy or not, it's not really a problem. Like, you just have to deal with it.
yeah.
And and we get exhausted even from emotions. I mean, of course, there is the exhaustion that is physiological, like our
Yeah.
mitochondria is not making energy,
Sure.
and we're like, why is this
Yeah,
happening? But
yeah,
there is that emotional and psychological part that is also very, very intense. And so
yeah.
when you work with your clients, I like to know, how do you marry the two? Because obviously, looking at things holistically, you can't fix one part of fatigue without fixing the other, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so great. So, yeah, when I'm working with clients, I have so many things I want to say based on what you just said, but I'll answer your question and I'll jump back to that. So when I'm working with clients, I really, again, I see us as being this physical, emotional, and energy body. And so when I'm listening to people, I'm very left brain and right brain. And when I'm working, I love my left brain. I love the differential diagnosis I use with my doctor brain. I love the research papers I read and the tests that I order so I can, see if I'm, what data I can get from that can help determine what we're going to do to get you feeling better. And I'm also intuitive. And I also understand that we're multidimensional beings, we're more than just this physical body. And so your dis-ease that's manifesting on your physical body from your headaches, your gut stuff, your, diarrhea, your constipation, your tiredness could also be from this emotional level and or the energetic level. Maybe you're an empath and you're picking up everybody else's stuff and you have been since you were a little kid. And that's what's influencing the emotional stuff, and that's impacting your body now that you've been in it for 40 years. So these are all, I'm always kind of listening for what I'm hearing. How people describe they're tired clues me into which of the root causes it might be impacting, and some of them are more emotionally based than others. And then of course I'm using testing to rule things in and out. Because of the experience I had with that hypnotherapist of doing the subconscious work, I mean, the power of the subconscious mind is huge. And I always talk about, if you think of your mind as being a pie, there's 5%, which is like the tiniest piece of blueberry pie you'd ever have. You'd be so disappointed if that was your piece of pie. That's your conscious thought. The rest is subconscious.
Yeah.
And that is, some of it's controlling your heart rate and your breathing rate, but most of it's just downloads of emotions and visions and auditory experiences you've had since you were in utero, and it's even inherited trauma or love or whatever. It's all inherited, and your brain is making stories between there. So that subconscious mind is so powerful. And so I often am, so sometimes we'll end up doing subconscious work to help shift that, or we'll do some other kind of something to access that subconscious mind, whether it's breath work or whether it's being referred out to work with somebody else with that. But, that mind is huge. It's a huge piece. And, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I like that because I feel like, again, if we go to an allopathic doctor, a lot of the times is dissecting us humans in many different pieces. Okay, let's check your thyroid.
Yeah. Here's the stomach department.
Yeah.
Here's the toe department for your arthritis. It's like, oh, you have hot flashes. That's down here, down the hall over there. Go over there. And you're like,
we have a doctor for every inch of us. And it's nothing that looks at the whole picture. Yeah. And, I always say this, and it's like a broken record, but like, for example, a gynecologist should be an endocrinologist. Like, it makes sense. And they are two different doctors. So it's when it comes to hormones, I think it's really important. You did mention when you were feeling the best that you were feeling, then you started feeling again that the fatigue was coming back. And it was through hormonal changes. Yes. So at the beginning before we started recording, we did touch on this, and I think it's nice to bring it into the recording and into the episode, because a lot of women find themselves through this. Like, first of all, a lot of women might have not had fatigue before, and then they get into their 40s and suddenly they just feel really tired. Right. And again, you go to the gynecologist to check if everything is fine, and nobody bothers to tell you, oh, by the way, your hormones are changing. Oh, it's just age. Yeah. You can't do anything about it, or expect to get worse. Yeah. And it's just a terrible story to tell because it's not true. And so I love to talk about this. I like to talk about fatigue and hormonal shifts. And as I mentioned before, our role in our families, I guess, as women, how do we, when we feel that way, how do we support ourselves without that underlying guilt that makes us feel like we can't look after ourselves?
Yeah. I think that's such a great question. And this is one of those things that I feel like is shifting through the generations that I'm so glad to hear. I feel like each generation does a better job parenting, and I see my kids, their friends, and I see the women who are their friends, and they have so much more understanding of their own boundaries and who they have the right to be in the world, which I think is great. But yes, I totally agree. Before I answer this question, I'm just going to back up for a second, because what I have seen in terms of patterns of working with thousands of patients for decades now is that there are certain windows in our lifetime when things come up. And if you don't address them during that first time, they come up again. So kids will have things like eczema, asthma, stuff like that. And often doctors will say they'll grow out of it. And sometimes they do. They grow out of it and then it comes back. And it's going to come back. They grow out of it because we have this incredible vital force through, if we're healthy, we have this vital force through our teenage years into our early 20s. And then it comes back. And I see people coming in their late 20s, early 30s, which is when I was having these miscarriages and I got really sick. And this feels like one of those first really big windows as an adult when something comes up in your life and it's kind of a knocking on the door, to your point of the dark night of the soul, of like, you have these things in there that you can choose to work on, or you can choose to push under the rug and just kind of live with a bump, right? And if you choose to if you choose to work on them, I always tell, it can be really empowering. And so this is one of those times where the asthma comes back, the illness comes back, or it turns into an autoimmune condition, or they have some sort of crisis, like relationship crisis, or like I did, right? So I feel like there's a window in late 20s and early 30s where we get to unpack the bags from our childhood and from those first 3 decades. And I tell the people who come into my clinic who are sick, like, how come I'm sick and nobody else is? I'm like, this is an opportunity for you. Honestly, if you're willing to take this and really do the work here that's presented, what is your body telling you to pay attention to? If we do this work now, you're going to be set up so much better for the next few decades until you get to the next window. And that next window is perimenopause for women. And this is the other time when things come up. It's like that big PMS window. It's like, that your PMS, how bad or easy your PMS is, has a lot to do with how is your health of your body? What's going on with your mental emotional world? How in tune are you with yourself? Like, that PMS is a place of vulnerability when you don't have as much hormone buffering you. The hormones are low right before your period. And so you're kind of left with you. And it's what I call a low tide situation. And you have the opportunity to look at the rocks. So in other cultures where women went and bled in the tent together, that could be a time to do healing work on the time when they were the most raw. And that was a beautiful thing. We don't have that in that culture. And I think it kind of stacks up. And here we are in perimenopause with this incredible, what I call low tide experience of being in this emotional roller coaster of these hormones going up and down. And kind of to what we were talking about in the beginning, even before we hit record, and talking about what a time this is. So the way that I see perimenopause is when we look at this hormone estrogen. Estrogen is a hormone that is about tend and befriend. It's there to make it so that we don't eat our children. Whether you have children or not, you still have this desire to take care of those around you. So at work, you're doing all the things. You're covering for everybody else, in your family life. You compile that in with, as we talked about, sort of dysfunctional family situations. And then add on top of that the cultural expectation of women, which is still there in this patriarchal culture, that we are going to always be doing and taking care of other people no matter what, and that our worth and our power is not as good as those of the men. I mean, that's still just the dominant thinking at this time. And so you tie all those together. So you have women in this estrogenic period up until they're going through menopause, where they're just doing the thing. They're tending and befriending. And then what happens is that as the progesterone starts to go down and the estrogen starts to get out of balance, there's a couple things that are happening here. And a very oversimplified explanation of it, that estrogen goes down. And all of a sudden, you're just like, I don't want to be doing this for everybody anymore. So how does that come out? Often it comes out as anger. Another reason we get so angry and irritable during perimenopause is literally those hormones, the progesterone and estrogen, are anti-inflammatory. They literally lower your inflammatory chemicals in your body. And some of those inflammatory chemicals make you mad. Like they just are you are just irritated, and they literally they literally inflame your brain. They trigger your microglia. You're literally kind of on fire in your brain. And I think that, and I also think that sometimes that anger can be very clarifying for you to understand where you have not been holding your boundaries, where you have been overreaching and giving more than is really the right thing for you to do. And I really see this perimenopause window as another one of those beautiful life transitions that we can go through, and we can go through some of it's bumpy, some of us go through with grace, some of us it's easy, some of us it's hard, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long. But it's really a window and an opportunity. In all the ancient texts, they talk about this is a time where we get to move as women more from this physical form, more into this energetic form of ourselves. We really get to have that second life of what is it that we want to be. And if we did have kids, often our children there are, they're more able to be doing their own thing. They can make their own food and do their own thing. And so it's a time for us to bring in what it is that we want. In terms of the energy piece, I think that the fatigue comes in there for a multitude of reasons. One, just having the hormones going up and down alone can make you feel tired. And there's an impact on your testosterone, on your estrogen, on your progesterone, and your pregnenolone. And having those out of whack, out of balance, it throws off. They're so intricately connected with every single system in your body that you do feel tired during this time. So just purely on a physical level, there's exhaustion. There's also I talked about the 5 root causes that get people into chronic fatigue, myalgic encephalitis, and long COVID. And the first one is what I call the gateway root cause. And it's this hormone triangle of the adrenal glands, the thyroid, and the ovaries, or the testes if you're male. And if one of these systems is out of whack, it pulls the other ones. Now, a lot of us in this culture run on the stress express. We're doing stuff 24/7 all the time. So a lot of us have that adrenal HPA imbalance, which we talked about in the beginning. Chantel, you know what that feels like, right? That adrenal fatigue. And so a lot of us go into perimenopause with adrenal fatigue because we've been so successful at taking care of everything all the time that we haven't rested and haven't felt worthy of that rest. And so that's out of balance. The thyroid may be out as well. So when you go into perimenopause and that ovary isn't able to do as much, the adrenal gland's supposed to take over from that adrenal hormonally. There's literally hormones that the adrenals are supposed to start producing and if your adrenal's fried, then it can't do it. So a lot of us, like that was definitely what's happened to me, was that I entered that period and I didn't have because I was so trashed from just all the other stuff I've been doing, that I entered that period. And because I was in severe pain, which wipes out your neurotransmitters, it was easier for me to go into that deep dive of things there. So I feel like there's all these different pieces that can lead to that. And then when you talk about that emotional level of like, wait a second, I don't want to be doing this anymore. There's another thing that can happen in our bodies that some people with really deep sickness and fatigue experience, which is it's a hibernation function of the mitochondria that you mentioned, where the mitochondria are these powerhouses inside our cells. If they perceive stress from the brain, from the body, they go into a hibernation or torpor or sickness syndrome, it's called, and they basically slow down. And it becomes this biofeedback system between the mitochondria and your nervous system and your brain, where your brain perceives that you're not safe and you need to go hide. There have been people who have looked at depression in a different way and said maybe some people are depressed because they need to slow down. It's like it's like your body's saying, you know what, maybe you need to just take a break a little bit. And just like some people get colds like you and I have now sometimes as a way to get a break, that I think for some people, this fatigue is sometimes it's a sign that your body is trying to tell you something, that maybe there's something more for you to look at, and figure out what's going on. And maybe is there a place, something that needs to change in a big way in your life?
That's very interesting, and you made a very good point. And it kind of segues into the next question, which is a lot of times people don't really take into consideration if they don't feel well, unless it's a very physical, almost like diagnosed problem, right? So you have a cold, okay, it's a diagnosed problem. You have a cold, you have a flu, you have COVID. It's diagnosable, so you're sick. But if you have fatigue because, you're pushing too much, and this is why adrenal fatigue is actually a funny one, because it's not always recognized by the medical system. It started,
Usually not recognized by the
yeah,
medical system, definitely recognized by functional medicine
yeah,
doctors, integrative physicians, and naturopathic doctors. Conventional medicine just still thinks it's a bunch of hooey. Yeah.
yeah. As you as you said, like our adrenals will take over our ovaries, as women once we don't bleed anymore in menopause. People think, oh, I just don't make any more hormones.
Right.
You make them,
Yeah.
you should make them in any case,
Yeah.
a lower level, but you make them, and this is why the adrenals are so important. But the adrenals are something you need to look at years before, not there and
Yes.
then.
Yes.
So it's really
Although
interesting.
better late than
And
never,
then,
I'd
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah, I'm not saying don't,
Definitely.
but
It's
yeah,
because it's so easy to test. It's so easy to test your adrenals with a 4-point cortisol test and get a really good idea if you're in the normal range or not.
yeah,
I mean, it's like one of those tests from all the functional medicine tests out there. It's one of the least expensive ones, and I highly recommend it.
yeah, brilliant. Do you also do the Dutch test to see where the hormones are at?
Sometimes I do the Dutch test. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Um, the other question that I would love to ask is, once we understand where we're at with this, right? We're like, okay, maybe I am more fatigued than I should be. I am, however, tired of looking after everybody. I just want
Yeah.
to do me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what should women do when it comes to this point? Because it's a fork. I feel like one side will take you through where you make radical decisions where, okay, I'm going to put myself first no matter what,
Yeah.
and there are collaterals in this, and the collaterals are oftentimes the relationships
Yeah.
that we have in our
Relationships, the
life.
profession. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the other side, it's like, maybe I love the people I'm in my life with,
Yeah.
and I don't want to give them up. I just
Yeah.
can't sacrifice myself any longer. How do
Yeah.
we ask for help if we want to stay on that side of the fork?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing too is important is to kind of think about, to understand that you're just like if you're a parent and you have an adolescent child, when that child's going through adolescence, you understand that their hormones are going like this, and some of their behavior is just based on hormones. And just like if, when you are PMSing, like you definitely have emotional experiences. Like I'm not like, I wasn't like a Hallmark card crier, except when I was PMSing or like the 2 months I tried to be on the pill. Like, and then I'm just like a classic kind of like, I cry at everything, right? Like these things have influence on your body. So I think it's important. When I first went through perimenopause, I went and I talked to one of my colleagues, and she's like, "Oh, I think you're in the, I won't use the full word, but I think she said, I think you're in the FU state. You're in the what I call the FU state perimenopause," which was hilarious. And I just cracked up laughing when I heard that. And then I expounded on it, which was this FU make your own sandwich stage, which is sort of like this thing that I think, which is how I see it. It's like, I'm basically, I was I would get angry, and I would, I was mad. And I remember, bless my husband for taking it, but I remember shouting at him about things. And it honestly was good for us in terms of, it was a clearing, and I'm glad he was able to hear me without it destroying the relationship, because our relationship is great right now. But there was something to honoring my anger that was important at that time. And also, I think it's important to understand that these are your hormones. So you may want to take your anger out with, with yourself, or with a thing like throw stuff, or talk to your friends, or whatever the thing is, and get the anger out and figure out what's the real thing underneath here that I need to really, that I really feeling like I'm not getting enough of, or I've been doing too much of, or where things aren't fair. It was definitely one of those windows of time where we renegotiated our relationship based on how I was feeling now. And so I now call it the make your own frickin' sandwich phase of things, because I'm like, basically from this state, I'm like, you can make your own sandwich. Like, F you, make your own sandwich. And here's the deal. As a postmenopausal woman, if I want to make you a sandwich, I will make you a sandwich. I'm going to make you the best sandwich you've ever freaking had, because I'm really good at making sandwiches. But you are now able to do your own thing. And it's kind of this boundary thing. Does that make sense? Of where, and so I think that if those of you if you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh my God, I'm like raging all the time. I remember this one woman, I was in my early 40s, so I wasn't there yet. And she's like, yeah, I was driving around and I was driving my car, and I realized that if I'm thinking this about everybody, then maybe it's me. And so she was kind of like mad at the mailman and mad at the person driving in front of her and mad at her husband and mad at her kids. And she was mad at everybody. And she's like, there's a common denominator here. Maybe it's me. So I think that's a call where maybe you don't want to like spew all that everywhere and destroy everything around you just because you're in the state of rage. That's a time to do the work inside of you in a safe space so you're not creating damage that you're going to regret later, and process that well. That said, there may be something that comes out of that that's super crystal clear. Like, you know what? I've been cooking all the dinners and doing all the dishes while you do this, and I also have a profession, and you know what? I'm not okay with that anymore. Like, I just realized I've been okay with it for 20 years. I'm not now. Sorry, you know? And then if that person is willing to like, well, screw that, I'm not going to make dinner, then you're just like, okay, maybe that relationship isn't the one that I want to be in anymore, right? You know, and kind of see what you can do there. So I think I mean, I always have this saying, you know, despite what I said that I was yelling at my husband, I really think it's important I think anger can be a very clarifying emotion, and it has its place. It can be something where but it's also can be addictive, where we can get addicted to the power of anger and to the energy of anger. And anger is an energizing emotion. So if you've been depressed, anger can feel good because there's at least motion in there. And yet you can get addicted to a cycle of it and create damage and then go through a regret kind of cycle. So I think being really clear about using that anger to get clear and processing the feelings in your body, and then speaking the things that really need to be spoken with as much clarity as you can, with creating the least amount of damage as possible. And I think that's going to keep us healthier in ourselves and in our relationships, so that we don't just throw it all away. And I think does that answer that?
It does. I think basically, to summarize it for anybody listening, is you have to make a judgment call here and see if you have the support that you need to be in a relationship that has to change. You have to change your role into it, but it can function because you have the support, or to realize that maybe you don't have that support, and therefore, well, this actually happens organically, because I feel if you don't have the support, what happens if you change because you're just exhausted doing the things you've done for 20 plus years and you can't anymore, things just fall apart because you are the glue if the other person is not making an effort, right?
Yeah, and I think that there was this really beautiful demonstration I saw in a workshop I did decades ago around codependence, which, I mean, in a sense, you know, we're all codependent. I think we need more community and connection to people, and we are codependent human beings and organisms. And so and there can be codependent relationships that aren't healthy, right? Where we're doing more than we feel like we should be, that feels good to us, to help just to stay in the relationship because that feels safe. And he did this demonstration where he had two people who were sort of leaning against each other and then bent down, and they were supporting each other because they were bent down. And he's like, what happens when one person stands up tall, straight, and strong on their own? That other person has two choices at that point. That other person can fall down because they've lost the support of this person and fall down, or they can stand up too. And then you have two strong people standing next to each other. And to me, that's a beautiful demonstration of what the choice you have right now is. Take care of yourself. It's like, be the one that stands up. It's like, if you need to go scream and shout and break bottles, go do that. Go do it somewhere safe. Go do it in a safe space where you can be heard and listened to and process. Figure out what you're really needing and what you're don't have enough of, or what you have too much of in your life. Get clear and do the work that you do so you can stand, because this is a period of growth for you. It's an incredible period of growth. Use the power of these emotions to push through this debris, this garbage, this stuff. You're in a new stage of life. Step into it. Stand up, and then see what happens to the people around you, and see what their choices are around that. And you'll know, because the more clear you are in yourself, the more clear you will be about how much you want to have a conversation with these people about how they can be with you. And the more clear you are, the more clear it's going to be about whether these are the ones you want to keep in your life right now, or if these are the ones that were just there for that season. And now you can move on to invite people that radiate and reflect back to you the strength that you are now in your life. right?
Yeah, that is such a good representation of what this is, because it's yeah, again, it's a choice, and it's
Yeah.
it's a hard one though, because we have to step out of our comfort zone. You can't, I mean, the people that choose to stay in it, like I said at the beginning, if the dark night of the soul is swinging, it's so to you, and you're just like, I don't see it. You're gonna get cut. It hurts. You're gonna pretend the cut is not there, but it still hurts and burns, and
Yeah.
you are just carrying on, thinking that nothing is hurting you, but you just feel that pain all the time,
Yeah.
and it's not very comfortable. And I think actually probably this is what leads us to have disease, and I'm talking about disease beyond adrenal fatigue or
Oh,
fatigue in
yeah.
general. I'm
Sure.
talking cancer,
Absolutely.
like actually really like the grieving our life, not just grieving the loss of people, but grieving the loss of our life. Because if we
Exactly.
are at a point where we feel, and this happens a lot in menopause, for
Yeah.
menopausal women, when we feel like we haven't lived,
Yes.
um, it's definitely a very heavy feeling to carry. And
Right.
there is also another part of this. I am obviously talking about women feeling in a certain way and having to make decisions. But there is also another part where men, they, when they get to 50 something, they might have this, also like the dark night of the soul. This is not just for
Yep.
women.
Absolutely.
And we call it a
Andropause.
midlife
Yeah.
crisis, right?
Andropause, midlife crisis.
Or
Yes,
andropause,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And they go from having like this high testosterone every 15 minutes, a nice little boost, to not
Yeah.
it's sometimes they still do have that, but it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I want to have a younger wife, I want to have a good time. Like they go into this like fear of aging.
Yes. Right.
And women sometimes are left with the husband leaving,
Yeah.
and then this anger, that rage builds up,
Yeah.
like I have sacrificed my
Yeah.
whole life for
Yeah.
this, and then they just replace me for a younger model. And
Yeah.
and that is just very common. It happens all the time. So I think I wanna just speak about the emotional support that women should get when they go through this dark night of the soul, and the decisions they have to make, and why it's okay to make hard decisions, thinking
Yeah.
about the long term benefits that they will get. Then I would
Yeah.
like to delve into the physical tips that we can give women to actually really dive into, if you're feeling fatigued and it's actually a chronic, especially with chronic fatigue, what to
Yeah.
do. But let's just, since we're talking about already the emotional part, let's just tie that in, and that chapter with what are the things that women can do so that it doesn't become resentment, because resentment also
Yeah.
eats away our own energy, so it really
Absolutely.
becomes like
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
impossible.
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about this, so a couple things I would say. So everything you're going through right now, if you're going through a really hard time, there's a potential of a gift there if you're willing to use it. As that. And for your story of your case, this example you gave of you get ditched for some 25-year-old, whatever, some 25-year-old model, whatever, and you've been doing all the work all these years. I would, I would process that as quickly and as well as you can. Like, don't rush yourself through it. I don't mean that. But what I mean is that, exactly to your point, that resentment is toxic poison to your body and to your body only. And the anger, the all of that is just, as soon, work through that, whether that's going to a workshop. I had a friend this happened to, and she moved through her pain more quickly than anyone else I'd seen. And she went away to a 5-day workshop, and she was like, told her story. And the guy was like, well, are you ready to let go of this? And she's like, no, he just did this like 2 months ago. I'm like, literally left with the younger woman. And he was like, okay, so how many years then do you want to live feeling this way? Like,
Exactly.
when are you going to be ready to drop this? And she was like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And then she dropped it that day. And so she literally came back, and all of their friends hadn't processed it. Like, she's like, I'm more clear than my friends are about this whole thing. I'm like, yep, that happened. That's what he decided. I'm moving on. Like, and she literally, to this day, I don't feel a speck, a gram of weight of resentment in her, and bless her for that, because she could have chosen to hang on and chewed on that thing for a long time
Yeah.
because man, he did it to her. And it's like none of that stuff helps us, none of it. So I'd say get through it as quickly, however, forgiveness, whatever you need to do around that, because literally you're the only one that can do that. Like, and also be grateful. Be grateful that you're not in a relationship with somebody that is that shallow, to be honest. And
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but that's how I see it. Like, that
Yeah.
literally, like if that guy's not willing to deal with their stuff to that level and have that level of conversation with you, honey, you're worth more than that shit. Like, you are. Like that's like so superficial. I can't even get over it. Like, you know? I mean, like, I personally would want to be with a man that has much more awareness of who they are and can stand up in themselves and at least talk, at least have a conversation and heal and talk about their insecurities and their fear of dying. And you can process it together and decide if the relationship isn't there for you both anymore, then fine, then split amicably. But do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
so, you know, okay, so that's that piece. So physical stuff on fatigue. What can people do? If you are struggling most days with not enough energy, whether you wake up in the morning and you feel like you're full of energy, but by the afternoon you have to take a nap after lunch, you're dragging through, you find yourself canceling out of doing things after work or going out with friends, you're dreading events on the weekends because you don't know how hard it's going to be, you find yourself pulling back from your workout routine, or maybe you're already on the couch. If you're exhausted, whether your energy goes up and down in a day or in a week, but you're spending time where you're energy budgeting, you're like calculating how much energy this is going to take and I'm going to pay for it, then this is something that needs attention. And I know, Chantel, you talked about on some of your YouTube channels, like there's things that you have to rule in and rule out. Yeah, like there are elephants in the room. Make sure it's not anemia. Make sure there isn't a cancer. Or these are things that you need to check in with your doctor about and just say, I'm tired. 9 times out of 10, you go into your regular doctor and say, I'm tired. And they're like, in their head, they're saying, yeah, me too, honey. What else you got for me? But
Yes.
which is part of the problem why this gets ignored is because the doctors are exhausted and don't
Yeah.
realize they have adrenal glands and that's what's going on with them.
Yeah. It's like, I'm a doctor. I don't have adrenal glands.
Yeah, right. And but so you'll get told, usually get told, Cheryl, pull your labs, and then they'll say, hey, your labs are
Everything
all
is
normal.
fine.
Congratulations. And look, your blood pressure is really low, which can be a sign of adrenal fatigue. Congratulations. You look great. See you later. So if you know in your body that there's something wrong with you, I can tell you that you know yourself better than any doctor. So you need to pay attention to that. And you need to find somebody that you can work with that can help you uncover what's really going on with you, or you need to kind of go on your own exploration and educate yourself so that you can look into the different things. As I said, in my 20 years of doing this and working with clients, what I find is that there's in general 5 different root causes that we can rule in and rule out that can drive somebody into a chronic fatigue, myalgic encephalitis state, or long COVID. And there are also 5 health foundations that can be dysregulated that we need to have in place for any treatment to work. And I don't think we have time at this point to go into all of those, but the health foundations are the things you would imagine, things like your sleep and your circadian rhythm, your digestion, your detoxification, your movement and your breath, your rhythm and your sleep, and your mindset and spirit. And then something we've talked about a bit that is a 5th root cause or 5th health foundation that came in post-pandemic, which was connection. So that's the one that kind of connects all of them, the connection to yourself, which we've been talking about, your community, which is so important as you're going through this change of time in your life, that you reach out to those that you do trust. Who's in your tribe? Who are your sisters? Who are your brothers? Who are the ones that, whether biological or not, you know what I'm talking about. Who are the ones that will support you in this journey? And then your higher self, whatever that is for you, whether it's being in nature, whether it's your whatever you practice, whatever that is for you. What's that higher self connection? So that connection piece is so important. So having those in place and working on them if they're not strong, those health foundations. And then ruling in and ruling out the different root causes with somebody. And so it could be a chronic reactivated virus. Could be that hormone triangle that's out of balance, the adrenal glands. It could be mitochondrial dysfunction. It could be this emotional, subconscious limbic brain stuff needs help and work. Or it could be toxins. Like the thing that got me out that first time I was in chronic fatigue was getting all 20 mercury amalgams out of my mouth. I had so much mercury in me. I couldn't function. And so, there was so many different things. And I would say each one of them, doctors out there find this condition overwhelming when you're tired. They don't understand it. So find somebody who understands what you're talking about. And I want you to know that there's always a way for you to be able to figure out what your root cause is. And there's always something out there that's going to be able to help you get your body back into normal, because your body wants to be in balance. It wants to be healthy, and it has the ability to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a brilliant summary. And, I think because we don't have the time to go into that, I definitely would love to. Maybe we'll talk about coming back to speak about the importance of the liver and in
yeah, absolutely.
detoxification, because I think
Fantastic.
when
I'd
it
be
comes
happy
to,
to.
yeah, when it comes to
Yeah,
fatigue,
yeah.
that's a big one.
It's
And also,
huge. It's
it's
huge.
huge. And
Yeah.
I also see people do these detoxes so wrong. So be good to talk about how to do it properly.
Yeah, do it wrong or at the wrong time. They do it before they're ready and their body isn't ready for it, and they get jumped in, or they think I totally happy to talk about that. Yes, I
Yeah,
agree.
fantastic. So, yeah, so we'll definitely have something to look forward to, and obviously tying in then into the kidneys and lymphatic, because that's one
Yes,
thing that it always gets missed out unless you
I
study it
agree.
properly.
I
And
agree.
and we know how our kidneys are so important because they support, in a way, like they literally hold our adrenal glands.
Right?
So yeah,
Right?
so there is
Right?
that
Yeah.
connection that it's always
Yeah.
missed as well. And so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really interesting to, yeah, to think about our body in a functional way. Which is
Yeah.
why, as you said, getting support is really important. Go and see a functional doctor,
Yeah.
someone that actually will look at your whole health history, will look at how emotionally how you're doing, so that she can or he can recommend you to also a practitioner can work with your mind, a psychologist or therapist. We all need support. I feel like we
Yeah.
have to really get out of this taboo that we got it together, and there's so much dogma. Sorry, but a lot of judgment around going to a psychologist still,
Yeah.
depending on which country you're in. I mean, in the US is
Yeah.
nice because in a way I'm like everybody goes to the psychologist. In New York, in New York they have this joke like the psychologist as a psychologist. Like it's really everybody goes. So that's nice. But there are places where it's not as common. Like in
Right.
Portugal, actually going to a psychologist, although it happens more often now than before,
Yeah.
because this country really is facing a lot of trauma,
Uh-huh.
generational. As a
Yes.
country itself, this is one of the
Right.
countries in Europe that had dictatorship the latest. So they came
Oh,
out of it
interesting.
not long ago.
Oh,
So there is
interesting.
definitely that piece that is there, but
Right. Right.
people feel very ashamed of saying that they need help,
Right.
and it's really
Right.
sad because we all
Yeah,
do.
it is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we would love to have you back and talk about that.
Thank you. I would be honored. Thank you.
Thank you. This was fantastic. How can people get in touch with you and reach out to you? So we put everything in the show notes, but so that they can find you online and talk to you about what they're facing.
Yeah. So the best place is to go to my website, which is drjennytufenkian.com. That's drjenny, Jenny, Tufenkian, T as in Tom, U, F as in Frank, E, N as in Nancy, KIAN.com. And on there, you will see, first of all, I have a quiz that you can take, which follows the algorithm of different root causes. And of course, it's not a diagnosis, but it gives you an idea of, is it the hormone triangle or is it the mitochondria based on how you answer that? So that's a great thing to do. And then if you're interested in having a deeper conversation, you can apply to have a free 30-minute chat with me. And I go through all the applications if it feels like it's a great fit. I work with people, I bring people on who I believe that I have the ability to help. And if I don't feel like I can help you, I let you know. And I also bring on people who are ready to do the work, because it's a journey. And you have to be ready to the journey. There's not a pill for this. It's a process, as you can tell from what we've been talking about. And I'm sure because you're listening to Chantel's podcast, you already know that.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm always like, there is no silver bullet. There is no
No,
silver.
well, Although we wish there was one. We've all been there. I've been there too. Like, oh my God, just give me something, please.
Yeah, let it go away.
Very
We're done. Is not the case. Actual healing really does take time. Sure,
Yes.
we can feel better for a moment. We can definitely temper a reaction. We can work with
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
you know, with anything, with the pain.
Yeah.
We can work
Yeah.
with even the fatigue. If you, for a moment, you could take coffee and have a moment where you feel like a little better, but you can't fix it without doing the work long term. So definitely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. This is brilliant. I really appreciate your time, Dr. Jenny, and hopefully, we'll talk soon and have you back on the show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny, and thank you everyone for staying on for this episode. I really cannot wait to have Dr. Jenny back on because we really have to speak about the liver and we have to speak about cleansing the body. I cannot wait. But guys, in the meantime, if you want to learn more about Dr. Jenny, please go into the show notes. Everything is there for you. Make sure that you really take the time to listen to your body and learn more about it. Especially as women, we really need to know what our cycles in our lives are. So my work and Dr. Jenny's work focuses on this. You have resources that are brilliant out there that we can also recommend. So make sure that you use them. Okay, as always, I want to ask you to please share, review, comment so that we can keep on growing and I can invite more and more amazing practitioners to share knowledge and educate us on this podcast. Until then, see you next week. Bye.